David Thompson stood in the sterile hospital room, his heart racing as he stared blankly at the white walls, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare on the scene before him. The scent of antiseptic hung heavily in the air, mingling with the faint sound of machinery beeping in the distance. It was a world that felt detached from his reality, a world where everything had changed in the blink of an eye. Just hours ago, he had received the news that shattered his existence. His sister, Sarah, was gone, taken from him in a tragic car accident. The doctor had been kind, yet the words echoed in David's mind like a relentless drumbeat. "I'm so sorry for your loss," the doctor had said, and those words felt like daggers piercing through his heart. Sarah had been more than just a sister. She had been his confidant, his anchor in a world that often felt chaotic. Now, without her, he felt adrift, lost in a sea of grief. As he stood there, the reality of his new responsibility settled over him like a heavy cloak. Leo, the newborn son Sarah had given birth to just weeks before her death, was now his to care for. A tiny infant, barely a few days old, lay in the nursery just outside the room, oblivious to the storm that had just engulfed their family. David had never met the child, and the thought of suddenly becoming a guardian felt overwhelming. The weight of the promise he had made to Sarah, to always look after her boy, pressed down on him. "David," a soft voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see Emily, his fiancée, standing at the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. "I can't believe this is happening," she murmured, stepping inside the room. "I didn't know how to reach you." David forced a nod, trying to mask the turmoil inside him. "I just can't believe she's gone. I don't even know what to do." His voice cracked, revealing the fissures in his carefully maintained facade. Emily moved closer, wrapping her arms around him, but the embrace felt different than usual. There was a tension in her touch, a hesitation that made his heart sink. "We'll get through this together, right? You and me?" Her assurance felt hollow, and David pulled away slightly, searching her face for the support he desperately needed. "I have to take care of Leo. I promised Sarah I would look after him." The words came out with a fierce determination, but he could see the flicker of concern in Emily's eyes. "David, that's a huge responsibility," she said, her tone shifting from comforting to cautionary. "You just lost your sister. You need time to grieve, not to take care of a baby." Her voice was steady, but held an unmistakable edge. David felt his chest tighten. "Emily, he's a part of her. I can't just abandon him because it's inconvenient for us." "Us?" Emily's voice rose slightly. "What about our plans? Our life together? I can't see how this fits into our future." She crossed her arms, a defensive posture that unsettled him further. David's heart ached at the realization of the chasm that was forming between them. "I thought you understood how much Sarah meant to me. Leo is family. I can't just turn my back on him." Emily sighed, her frustration evident. "I know, but life is complicated. We're supposed to be starting a new chapter, not dealing with a child who needs constant attention. This isn't what I envisioned for us." "Neither did I," David shot back, his voice rising. "But I can't just walk away from my responsibility. Can you?" The silence that followed was deafening. David watched Emily's expression shift, uncertainty creeping in. She opened her mouth to respond, but then closed it, frustration etching deeper lines on her forehead. "I just don't want us to lose everything we've worked for," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. David turned away, looking out the window at the gray sky. The world outside felt so far removed from the turmoil within him. He had always envisioned a future with Emily, but now he felt as if that future was slipping away, tangled in the web of obligations and grief. As they left the hospital, the weight of the day settled heavily on David's shoulders. He had never felt so lost, so torn between the life he had built and the sudden responsibility of being a parent. The funeral was a blur of black suits and somber faces. Friends and family gathered to pay their respects, but all David could think about was the void left by Sarah's absence. He stood beside the casket, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. The priest spoke softly, words of comfort that felt distant and hollow. "David," Emily's voice broke through his thoughts again. She stood beside him, her expression softening as she watched him. "Are you okay?" He nodded, though his heart felt heavy. "I'm just thinking about everything." "I know it's a lot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we need to think about what's next. You can't take on the world alone." David turned to face her, desperation clawing at him. "I can't abandon Leo. I made a promise to Sarah." Emily's eyes flashed with frustration. "And what about us? What about our future?" He felt the tension between them swell, the unspoken fears and doubts hanging in the air like an uninvited guest. "I thought you understood," he replied, his voice low but firm. "I want to understand, David. I do. But I can't pretend this doesn't change everything," she said, her tone softening. "We need to figure this out together." David looked into her eyes, searching for the reassurance he craved. But all he found was a reflection of his own turmoil. The funeral ended, but the weight of the day lingered, and as they drove back to his childhood home, David felt an unsettling sense of uncertainty creeping in. Once inside, the silence enveloped him. The familiar walls of the house felt alien, a place where laughter had once echoed but was now filled with shadows of loss. He wandered through the rooms, memories flooding back with each step. Sarah's laughter, their childhood games, the warmth of family gatherings. In the dim light of the living room, he spotted a small stack of envelopes on the coffee table, partially hidden beneath a pile of old magazines. Curiosity piqued. He reached for them, flipping through until one caught his eye. It was addressed to him in Sarah's delicate handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened the letter, his heart racing as he read her words. "David, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. I want you to know that I love you, and I'm so proud of you. Please promise me you'll take care of Leo. He needs you." Tears welled in his eyes as he continued reading. "Life can be complicated, but family is everything. You're stronger than you think, and I know you'll do what's right. Trust your heart, David." As he finished the letter, the gravity of his promise settled over him like a warm embrace. He could feel Sarah's presence in those words, urging him to rise to the occasion. With a newfound determination, David wiped away his tears. He had a purpose now, a reason to fight through the pain. Leo was more than just a responsibility. He was a part of Sarah, and David would not let her down. The weight of grief still pressed on him, but alongside it was a flicker of hope. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. The road would be difficult, but he was resolved to navigate it, not just for himself, but for the memory of his sister and the sake of the child who needed him now more than ever. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of David Thompson's luxurious, yet now hollow home, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. It was a space once filled with laughter and warmth, but in the wake of Sarah's death, it felt more like a tomb. David stood at the threshold of the living room, cradling his newborn nephew, Leo, in his arms. The baby, swaddled in a soft blue blanket, cooed and squirmed, blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding him. David took a deep breath, trying to embrace the joy of this moment. He had promised Sarah he would take care of Leo, and he had every intention of keeping that promise. But as he looked down at the tiny face staring up at him with wide, innocent eyes, a wave of panic washed over him. He had never been a parent. He had never even changed a diaper. The reality of his new life was daunting, and the ache of loss gnawed at his heart. "David, can you please hurry up?" Emily's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed, her expression a mix of impatience and frustration. "We have dinner reservations, and I can't be late." "Emily, it's just dinner," he replied, trying to keep his tone light, though the tension in the air was palpable. "This is Leo's first day home. Can't we just take a moment?" She rolled her eyes, her frustration morphing into annoyance. "This is not how I imagined our life together, David. I thought we would have time to ourselves, just the two of us. Now, with this baby, everything is different." David felt a tightening in his chest. "Emily, this baby is my nephew. He needs me. I promised Sarah I would take care of him." Emily let out a huff, stepping closer. "And what about us? What about our plans? We were supposed to start our life together, and now you're acting like you've adopted a child instead of taking care of a family emergency." His heart raced, torn between the two people he cared about most. "I'm trying to do the right thing here. Can't you see that? This isn't just about you anymore, David," she snapped. "You need to decide what you want. Do you want to be a father, or do you want to be with me?" The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. David's mind spiraled, caught in a cyclone of emotions. He had never felt this level of pressure before, and the thought of losing Emily was as terrifying as the prospect of failing Leo. As if sensing the tension, Leo let out a small whimper, and David instinctively began to rock him gently. "Sure, it's okay, little buddy," he murmured, his voice soothing. "I've got you." Emily's expression softened for a moment, but only for a fleeting second. "You're gonna have to figure this out, David. I can't keep waiting indefinitely for you to make a choice." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving David alone with the baby in his arms. The silence that followed was deafening. He felt a pang of guilt twist in his stomach, not just for the tension with Emily, but for the weight of expectation that had suddenly fallen onto his shoulders. As night fell, David found himself in the nursery he had hastily set up for Leo. The room was painted a soft yellow, with animal-themed decor and a crib that looked far too big for the small child who would occupy it. But as he stared down at Leo, sleeping peacefully, all the chaos of the day faded into the background. He knelt beside the crib, watching the rise and fall of Leo's tiny chest. "You have no idea what you've gotten into, do you?" he whispered, a sad smile creeping onto his face. "You're going to be a handful, I can tell." Despite the overwhelming challenges ahead, David felt a flicker of hope. He had to admit, there was something undeniably beautiful about this new chapter in his life, even if it came at a steep price. The next day, David decided he needed to reach out for help. He called Michael, his old friend from college, who had always been more of a brother to him than a friend. He remembered Michael's easygoing nature and how he had a knack for dealing with chaos. "Hey man, it's been a while," Michael greeted, his voice warm and familiar. "What's going on?" David hesitated, unsure how to frame the chaos of his life into words. I brought my nephew home yesterday. It's been a bit overwhelming." "Wow, congratulations." Michael's enthusiasm was palpable. "So, you're a dad now, huh? Is it what you expected?" "Not even close," David admitted, a chuckle escaping his lips. "I've never done anything like this. I could really use some advice." "Of course. I can come over and help out. I'll bring some groceries, and we can figure it out together. Plus, I've got some great parenting tips from my sister. She's got 3 kids, so she knows a thing or two." "Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it," David replied, relief flooding through him. "I could use a friend right now. Just give me an hour," Michael said before hanging up. As David waited, he felt a mix of trepidation and hope. He hadn't seen Michael in years, but the thought of having his support was a welcome relief. When Michael arrived, he brought with him not only bags of groceries, but an infectious energy that filled the room. "All right, where do we start?" Michael asked, tossing a bag onto the counter. "Diapers? Bottles? Or do you want me to dive into the emotional aspect of parenting first?" "Let's start with the basics," David replied, grateful for Michael's lightheartedness. "I've got no idea how to even change a diaper." Michael laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that echoed in the kitchen. "Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. Here, let me show you." As Michael guided him through the process, David felt a sense of camaraderie return. He watched as Michael deftly changed Leo's diaper, his hands moving with a practiced ease that David envied. "There, not so hard, right?" Michael grinned, stepping back to admire his work. "Just think of it as a puzzle. You figure out how to fit all the pieces together, and it just clicks." "Yeah, I guess," David said, still feeling a bit overwhelmed. "But what if I mess it up?" "You will," Michael said, shrugging nonchalantly. "Just like we all do. But that's part of the learning process. You're going to screw up a lot, but that's okay. Just keep trying." David nodded, absorbing Michael's words. "Thanks for helping me out. I didn't realize how much I needed this." "Anytime, buddy," Michael said, clapping David on the back. "But let's talk about something else for a second. How's everything going with Emily?" David's heart sank at the mention of her name. "Not great, to be honest. She's not handling this well. She wants me to choose between her and Leo. Michael raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something in his expression that David couldn't quite place. That's tough. I mean, you can't just turn your back on family. But I get it. She wants her life back too. David sighed, feeling the weight of the choices ahead. I just wish she could understand that I'm trying to do the right thing. Sometimes it's hard to see the bigger picture, Michael said softly. But you've got to do what feels right for you, man. As the evening wore on, David found himself lost in the camaraderie with Michael, the worries about Emily and the future momentarily receding into the background. But in the back of his mind, a gnawing feeling persisted, a whisper of doubt that neither he nor Michael seemed to be addressing. Later that night, as David laid Leo down in the crib, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads. With every passing moment, the chasm between him and Emily widened. And as much as he wanted to fill that void, he felt the pull of his responsibility to Leo surging within him. "Tomorrow is a new day, little buddy," he murmured, brushing a thumb across Leo's cheek. "We'll figure this out together. I promise." But as he turned off the light and stepped into the darkened hallway, he was left alone with the uncertainty of what lay ahead, a future tangled in choices and loyalties, with the weight of his sister's promise ever looming over him. David sat in the sterile classroom, surrounded by a group of strangers who, like him, were grappling with the weight of loss. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, illuminating the worn faces of parents who had experienced unimaginable tragedies. He could feel their grief in the air, a tangible presence that echoed his own. This parenting class, designed for those who were new to the role under less than ideal circumstances, was intended to provide support, but it felt more like a reminder of his isolation. As the instructor, a warm woman in her 40s named Lisa, began to speak, David glanced around the room. To his left was a woman clutching a teddy bear, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. On his right, a man in a faded baseball cap stared blankly at the floor, lost in thought. David shifted in his seat, trying to focus on Lisa's comforting voice. "Today, we're going to talk about how to cope with the overwhelming feelings that come with being a new parent, especially in difficult circumstances," she said, her tone soothing yet firm. "I want you all to know that you're not alone. Each of you carries a story of loss, and it's okay to share that with us." David took a deep breath, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. His thoughts drifted to Leo, the tiny baby who had become the center of his world since Sarah's death. He had promised to take care of him, but he often felt like he was stumbling through the dark, unsure of how to be a father. The thought of disappointing Leo, of failing in the promise he made to Sarah, gnawed at him. "Let's start by introducing ourselves," Lisa suggested. "Please share your name and a little bit about your story." One by one, the attendees spoke, sharing their heartbreaking experiences. A young mother named Rachel described the sudden loss of her husband in a car accident, leaving her to raise their 2-year-old alone. A middle-aged man named Tom shared how he had become the guardian of his niece after his sister's battle with addiction ended tragically. Each story resonated with David, pulling at the strings of his own grief. When it was his turn, he hesitated, feeling exposed. "I'm David," he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I recently lost my sister in an accident. I'm now taking care of her baby Leo. I'm still trying to figure everything out." As he spoke, he could feel the weight of their gazes on him, a mixture of sympathy and understanding. After the introductions, Lisa encouraged them to discuss their feelings, leading to an open dialogue about the challenges they faced. "I feel so lost sometimes," Rachel admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to be a single parent. I'm terrified I'll mess it all up." David nodded, feeling a kinship with her fear. "I understand. I've never been a parent before, and now I'm responsible for this little life. It's overwhelming. Have you tried reaching out for help?" Tom suggested. "There are resources out there, support groups, even online forums. It's important to connect with others who understand what you're going through." David considered this, the thought of seeking help both daunting and comforting. He had been so focused on fulfilling his promise to Sarah that he hadn't thought about his own needs. But could he really ask for help without appearing weak? As the session continued, David found himself opening up more than he had anticipated. With each shared story, he felt a little lighter, as if the burden of his grief was being distributed among the group. They exchanged phone numbers, vowing to support one another beyond the classroom walls. For the first time since Sarah's death, David felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps he wasn't entirely alone in this journey. After the class, however, the weight of reality crashed back down on him. He returned home to a silence that felt suffocating, the remnants of Sarah's life echoing in every corner. As he stepped into the living room, he was met with the sight of Leo's empty crib, the soft mobile still spinning gently above it. The stark reminder of the little life dependent on him sent a pang of anxiety through his chest. He had promised himself to be strong for Leo, but doubts crept in like shadows. What if he failed? What if he couldn't be the father Sarah had hoped he would be? The thought spiraled in his mind, tightening its grip around his heart. Just then, he heard the front door open. Emily stepped inside, dragging a suitcase behind her. Her expression was a mix of determination and frustration, and David's stomach churned at the sight of her. He had known this moment would come, yet it felt like a punch to the gut. "David," she started, her voice sharp. "We need to talk." He felt his heart sink. "Emily, please, can we not do this now? I just got back from class." Her eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what I want to talk about. You're spending all your time in these classes, talking to strangers about your feelings. What about us? What about our future?" David ran a hand through his hair, his patience thinning. "My future is tied to Leo now. I made a promise to Sarah, and I intend to keep it." Emily scoffed, her voice rising. "You think you can just drop everything for a baby? This was never part of the plan, David. I can't be with someone who prioritizes a child over our life together." "Emily, you don't understand," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "This isn't just any child. This is my nephew. I owe it to my sister to take care of him. I can't just walk away." She threw her hands up in frustration. "And what about me? I didn't sign up for this. I want a life, David, a life that doesn't revolve around a baby. Can't you see how this is tearing us apart?" David felt his anger boiling over. "You're being incredibly selfish. I'm trying to do the right thing here, and all you can think about is yourself. Selfish? I'm trying to save our relationship. You're too far gone in this fantasy of being a father. You'll never be able to replace Sarah, and you need to realize that." The room fell silent, the air crackling with tension. David's heart raced as he fought to keep his emotions in check. "I'm not trying to replace her. I'm trying to honor her memory. I can't just abandon Leo because it's inconvenient for you." Emily's eyes blazed with anger, and in that moment, David saw a side of her he had never fully acknowledged, a side that was willing to sacrifice his family for her own desires. "You need to choose, David. It's either me or him. You can't have both." The ultimatum hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating and inescapable. David's chest tightened as he processed her words. He felt cornered, trapped between two worlds, each pulling him in opposite directions. "You don't get to make that choice for me," he said, his voice low but firm. "Then I guess you've made your choice." Emily snapped, her voice laced with hurt. She turned on her heel and marched toward the door, leaving David standing there, stunned and heartbroken. "Emily, wait," he called after her, but the door slammed shut, echoing through the empty house. The silence that followed felt deafening, amplifying the loneliness that surrounded him. David sank onto the couch, his head in his hands, torn apart by the realization that he had lost the woman he loved. He glanced toward the crib, where Leo lay sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had just erupted in his life. In that moment, David felt an overwhelming sense of inadequacy wash over him. Could he really do this alone? Could he be the... As if summoned by his thoughts, Emily stepped into the room, her expression a mixture of irritation and concern. "David, we need to talk," she said, crossing her arms tightly against her chest. David straightened, feeling a familiar tension coil in the air. "Can it wait? I was just bonding with Leo." "Bonding?" Emily scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You spend 10 minutes with him, and suddenly you're a parent? This isn't a game, David. We have real problems to address." He set his jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. What do you want me to do? Just forget about him? Forget about Sarah's wishes? Emily stepped closer, her tone shifting to a more pleading one. I just want us to focus on our future. This child is a distraction, and you know it. You can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. David's heart raced. You think I'm pretending? I'm trying to honor my sister's memory. Leo needs me. He's an innocent child. And what about us? What about our plans? Emily countered, her voice rising. You think I want to be tied down to a baby? This isn't what I signed up for. I made a promise to Sarah, David shot back, his voice strained. I can't just abandon Leo. He's family. Emily took a step back, her expression hardening. You need to choose, David. It's either me or him. You can't have both. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating the space between them. David's heart sank as he processed the ultimatum. He felt torn, a rift widening between the life he had dreamed of and the reality he now faced. You can't be serious, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I am serious. If you choose that child, don't expect me to stick around, she replied, her eyes cold. With that, she turned on her heel and left the room, leaving David alone with the weight of her words and the innocence of the sleeping child. As the days passed, David found himself drawn deeper into the world of fatherhood. He learned to change diapers, to soothe Leo's cries, and even to enjoy the simple pleasures of feeding him. Every coo, every smile from Leo felt like a small victory, a reminder that in this chaos, he could still find moments of joy. One afternoon, David was sitting on the floor with Leo propped up against his legs, the baby giggling as David made silly faces. The laughter echoed in the room, filling the space with a warmth that had been sorely missing since Sarah's death. He paused, looking down at Leo, his heart swelling with an overwhelming sense of love. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, breaking the moment. David reluctantly got to his feet, leaving Leo in his playpen, and opened the door to find Michael standing there, a broad smile plastered across his face. Hey man, I thought I'd drop by and see how you're holding up, Michael said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. David forced a smile, though he felt a flicker of unease. I'm managing, just trying to get the hang of this parenting thing. Right, Michael replied, his tone casual, but there was something in his eyes, an intensity that made David uneasy. How's it going with Emily? Still planning that wedding? David's smile faltered. We're working on things, he said cautiously. Michael raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting. You know, if you ever need support, I'm here for you. I can help with Leo, give you a break, maybe even help out financially if you're feeling the pinch. David felt a chill run down his spine. I appreciate it, but I can handle it. I made a commitment to Leo. Of course, Michael said, his voice smooth, but the undertone was clear. Just remember, family is important, but so is being smart with your resources. You've got a lot of wealth at your fingertips, and it's wise to consider what's at stake here. What do you mean? David asked, narrowing his eyes. Michael shrugged, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Was it envy? Just saying that sometimes wealth can create opportunities. You could do so much more with it than just babysitting. The implication hung heavy in the air, and David felt a surge of protectiveness for Leo. I'm not looking to exploit anything, Michael. I want to take care of my nephew, not turn him into a business venture. Of course, Michael replied, raising his hands in mock surrender. Just offer my 2 cents. You know I've always had your back. But if you look at the bigger picture, you might see things differently. David nodded, but unease lingered in his chest. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on Leo's laughter echoing from the other room. Later that evening, after Michael had left, David sat at the kitchen table, staring at the scattered papers that had once been Sarah's. He was rifling through them when the phone rang, the shrill sound breaking the silence. Hello, he answered, his voice tinged with fatigue. Mr. Thompson? This is Linda from Anderson Associates. I'm calling regarding your sister's will. The voice on the other end said, crisp and professional. David sat up straighter, his heart racing. Yes? What about it? You should know that Sarah left everything to her son, Leo. This includes her estate, her assets, and any financial holdings. The words struck him like a bolt of lightning, igniting a fierce protectiveness in his heart. Everything, he echoed, disbelief washing over him. Yes, Mr. Thompson, as the sole guardian, it's your responsibility to ensure Leo's well-being and manage his inheritance until he comes of age. David's mind raced with possibilities, but with it came a gnawing concern. What about any potential threats to that inheritance? Is there any sort of safeguard in place? That's precisely why I'm calling. Given the circumstances surrounding Sarah's death, it might be prudent to look into protective measures. You never know who might come out of the woodwork, Linda said, her tone grave. David felt a chill creep down his spine. Thank you for the warning. I'll discuss this with my legal counsel. After the call ended, David sat in the dim light of the kitchen, the weight of his sister's last wishes settling heavily on his shoulders. He glanced toward the nursery, where Leo slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing around him. David's resolve hardened. He would protect Leo at all costs, no matter what it took. But lurking behind that determination was a growing sense of dread. With Michael's veiled suggestions and Emily's ultimatum still fresh in his mind, he realized that the path ahead was fraught with unseen dangers, and the stakes had never been higher. David Thompson sat at his desk, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders as he sifted through the papers scattered across its surface. In the dim light of his study, shadows danced on the walls, mirroring the turmoil within him. He had spent the last few days meticulously going over Sarah's financial records, searching for any clue that could explain the unsettling discrepancies he had uncovered. As he examined the documents, his mind kept returning to the conversations he'd had with Michael, his childhood friend, whose demeanor had grown increasingly suspicious in recent weeks. David, you're overthinking this, Michael had said during their last meeting, casually leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Sarah's world was complicated. People sometimes make bad investments, and it doesn't mean there's a conspiracy lurking behind every corner. But David couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. You're saying that Sarah would just make mistakes with her finances? She was always so meticulous, he had countered, his voice tinged with frustration. People change, especially when they're under stress, Michael replied, dismissing David's concerns with a wave of his hand. You should focus on what's important now. Leo needs you. David had let it go at the time, but as he stared at the documents now, he felt a familiar knot of unease tighten in his stomach. With each passing day, his trust in Michael waned. He had once regarded him as a confidant and ally, but now doubts clouded his judgment. Just then, the door creaked open, and a familiar voice broke through his thoughts. Hey, David, can we talk? It was Emily, her presence instantly filling the room with a mixture of warmth and tension. She had returned a few days ago, claiming she wanted to reconcile, but David remained cautious. He had seen the cracks in their relationship widen, and the last thing he wanted was to be blindsided again. Of course, he replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. What's on your mind? Emily stepped further into the room, her expression a blend of sincerity and determination. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. I want to help with Leo. I know I can be stubborn, but I want to make this work. Really? David's skepticism was palpable. You left, Emily. You walked out when things got tough. He couldn't hide the hurt in his voice. Why should I believe this change is genuine? She took a step closer, her blue eyes pleading. I know I made a mistake. I was scared, David. I didn't think I was ready for this responsibility. But now that I'm back, I want to support you and be there for Leo. I care about both of you. David studied her, searching for any signs of deceit. What's changed? Why now? I realized that I was being selfish, she admitted, her voice softening. I thought I could just walk away and leave the chaos behind, but I can't. I love you, and I want to be a family. Can't we try to start over? David felt his defenses wavering. He wanted to believe her, to grasp the hope she offered, but the nagging doubts about her motives lingered like a stubborn shadow. I need to think about this. David, please, she pressed, her voice rising slightly. I want to help. I can be a good mother to Leo. We can figure things out together. He sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. It's not just about us. There's so much at stake now. especially with what Sarah left behind. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? David hesitated, weighing his words carefully. I've been looking into Sarah's finances. There are some discrepancies, things that don't add up. I can't shake the feeling that someone may have been manipulating her. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Manipulating her? Who? Do you think? I don't know, he interrupted, his voice growing more urgent. But I need to find out. I can't let Leo be a pawn in someone else's game. Have you talked to Michael about it? She asked, her tone shifting slightly. I've spoken to him, David replied, the bitterness creeping into his voice. But I'm starting to wonder if he's as trustworthy as I thought. David, you can't think that way. Michael is your friend. He's here to help, Emily said, her tone defensive. Is he? David shot back, his frustration boiling over. I don't even know what to think anymore. It feels like everyone has their own agenda. Emily stepped back, taken aback by his intensity. I'm just trying to help you, David. I want to be part of this. I want to be a family. She turned to leave, and David felt a pang of regret. Wait, he called out, stopping her in her tracks. I'm sorry. It's just everything is so complicated right now. I don't want to make any rash decisions. I understand, she said quietly, her voice softer now. But just remember, I'm here for you. I want to be part of Leo's life. As she left the room, David felt a mix of emotions swirling within him. Could he truly trust her? Or was this just another layer of deception hiding behind a facade of love? He glanced back at the documents spread across his desk, the answers he sought still eluding him. Later that evening, as he rummaged through Sarah's belongings in search of something, anything that could help him understand the mess that had become his life, David stumbled upon a small, ornate box tucked away in the back of a drawer. Its surface was scratched, but it held an air of significance that drew him in. As he opened it, a rush of nostalgia washed over him. Inside lay a collection of letters, old photographs, and mementos that chronicled their childhood. Among the items, one letter caught his eye. The handwriting was unmistakable, Sarah's. He unfolded the paper, the familiar scent of her perfume wafting up, and began to read. David, it began, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer here. I want you to know that you were always my protector, my anchor. Please take care of Leo, no matter the cost. There are things about my life you don't know, secrets I've kept to protect you in him. Trust your instincts and don't let anyone steer you away from what's right. There may be people who smile at you, but not everyone has your best interests at heart. David's heart raced as he read the words. The implications were staggering. Who was she warning him about? Could it be Michael? The thought sent a chill down his spine. As he continued reading, he found another note, hastily scrawled, almost like a postscript. Be careful of Emily. She may not be who she seems. The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. David felt the ground beneath him seem to shift once more. The woman he loved, the woman he had hoped would stand by him, could potentially be a threat? The revelation sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. With a newfound sense of urgency, David closed the box and took a deep breath. He had to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He couldn't afford to let his emotions cloud his judgment any longer. As he prepared for the inevitable confrontation, he steeled himself for the battles ahead, knowing that loyalty and trust were luxuries he could no longer afford. David stood in the dimly lit study, his heart racing as he clutched the hidden message he had discovered among Sarah's belongings. The paper felt like a weighty anchor in his palm, laden with implications he was only beginning to grasp. Emily paced the room, her expression a blend of annoyance and concern, as if she could not decide whether to defend herself or flee the confrontation. David, you need to calm down. That note doesn't mean anything, Emily said, her voice a mixture of irritation and feigned indifference. She crossed her arms, her posture defensive, as she eyed him warily. Doesn't mean anything? It's a warning, Emily. Sarah was trying to tell me something important. David shot back, his frustration bubbling over. And now I find out that you've been feeding information to Michael? What the hell were you thinking? Emily shrugged, her eyes narrowing. I was trying to protect us, David. You think I want to live in some kind of chaotic mess? You're losing yourself in this obsession with Leo, You're not thinking straight. Protect us? David echoed incredulously, shaking his head. You're not protecting anything. You're playing a dangerous game, and it's not just about us anymore. It's about Leo's future. Don't you see? Emily's voice rose, sharp and cutting. Michael is a friend. He was there for you when Sarah died. I thought you could trust him, but you're so blinded by this sense of duty that you can't see the bigger picture. The bigger picture? David scoffed, stepping closer. The bigger picture is that Sarah entrusted me with Leo, and you're trying to take that away from me. You're the one who's blinded by your ambitions. The air between them crackled with tension. Emily's face flushed with anger, but beneath it, David could see a flicker of fear. You don't understand what's at stake, do you? You're a successful businessman, David. People are going to come after you. After Leo. I thought I was helping you prepare for that. Helping. David's voice was low, filled with disbelief. By betraying me to Michael? You think he has our best interests at heart? Before she could respond, the door swung open, and Michael strode in, his demeanor casual yet commanding. Am I interrupting something? He asked, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. He glanced between David and Emily, sensing the palpable tension. What do you want, Michael? David snapped, his patience wearing thin. I actually came to discuss some important matters regarding Leo, Michael replied, unfazed by David's hostility. He produced a stack of legal documents from his briefcase, laying them out on the desk with a flourish. Seems I might have a claim to guardianship. David's heart sank as he scanned the documents. What do you mean you have a claim? This is absurd. Michael leaned against the desk, his confidence radiating. You see, David, Sarah and I had an understanding before her passing. She confided in me about her concerns. She believed it would be best for Leo to have someone responsible at the helm, someone who could provide for him. In her will, she named me as a secondary guardian should anything happen to you. Emily's eyes widened in shock, and she exchanged a glance with David, her expression shifting from anger to concern. This can't be true, she stammered. David, you need to fight this. Fight what, Emily? David's voice was strained, a mix of disbelief and desperation. I don't even know if this is legitimate. Michael leaned closer, his tone conspiratorial. You see, David, you're not the only one who has financial interests to protect. I'm just looking out for Leo's best interests. If you can't provide a stable environment for him. Stable environment? David interrupted, his voice rising. You think swooping in with legal documents gives you the right to claim my nephew? You don't know anything about being a parent. Maybe not, Michael admitted, a hint of arrogance in his voice. But I know how to navigate the system. And right now, you're too emotionally invested to make rational decisions. Enough, David shouted, his anger boiling over. Get out. I won't let you manipulate this situation. Leo is my responsibility, and I will fight for him. Michael straightened, a glimmer of triumph flashing across his face. Very well, David. But remember, you're not the only player in this game. I'll do what it takes to ensure Leo is well cared for, even if that means stepping over you. He turned and walked out, leaving behind a heavy silence. David's heart raced as he processed the weight of Michael's words. He felt the ground shift beneath him, the foundation of his newfound resolve crumbling. Emily, I can't believe this is happening, he murmured more to himself than to her. She stepped closer, her tone softening. David, we need to think this through. There must be a way to fight back. We can't let him take Leo away from you. Just as David was about to respond, an acrid smell pervaded the air, thick and suffocating. He frowned, looking around the study. Do you smell that? He asked, confusion etching his features. Emily's eyes widened in horror. Oh my God, it smells like smoke. We need to get out of here. Panic surged through David as he rushed to the door, but it swung open abruptly, revealing thick, black smoke billowing in from the hallway. We need to get Leo, he shouted, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Together, they bolted toward the nursery, the smoke growing denser and more suffocating with each passing second. David's heart raced as he pushed through the haze, calling out for Leo. Leo, where are you? Emily's voice trembled as she shouted. He's in the crib. We have to hurry. Just as David reached the nursery door, a loud crack echoed through the house, and the ceiling above them groaned ominously. He felt a surge of fear gripping his heart. "Stay close to me," he yelled, lunging into the room. The sight of Leo sleeping peacefully in his crib was both a relief and a heartbreaking reminder of everything he stood to lose. He reached down to scoop the baby into his arms, cradling him against his chest. "I've got you, buddy. I won't let anything happen to you," he murmured, determination flooding his veins. But as he turned to leave, the doorframe splintered with a deafening crash, sending debris tumbling down. David instinctively shielded Leo with his body, his heart pounding as the chaos unfolded around him. "Emily!" he shouted, his voice hoarse from the smoke. She appeared at the threshold, her face pale but resolute. "This way," she urged, gesturing toward the window. "We can climb out." As they stumbled toward the window, the fire crackled and roared behind them, a beast unleashed. David felt the heat singe his arms, but he pressed forward, driven by the primal instinct to protect Leo. With one last look back, he saw the flames licking at the walls, a stark reminder of the betrayal and the chaos that had engulfed their lives. "We're getting out of here," he yelled, his voice filled with a fierce determination. Just as they neared the window, a loud explosion erupted, sending shards of glass and wood flying through the air. David felt a sharp pain slice through his side as debris rained down, but he didn't stop. He pushed through the pain, determined to escape with Leo, the weight of his regrets looming heavy over him. In that moment, as the world around him collapsed, he realized the truth. Loyalty could cost everything, and sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who can bring the greatest harm. As they climbed through the broken window, the heat engulfed them, and David felt the ground shift beneath him once more. The lesson was stark. Misplaced trust could lead to devastating consequences, and in his fight to protect Leo, he would have to confront not only the flames, but the very people he once believed would stand by his side.